You have been putting money into your retirement account for 3 years now. You check the balance on a Sunday morning and it says $41,000. You do the math and realize that almost all of that is money you deposited yourself. The market did not lose. It did fine. But the growth on a base that small added maybe a few $1,000s over 3 years, and the rest is just your contributions stacking up slowly. You thought compounding was supposed to be this powerful force, but right now it feels like rounding error on a number that is still not close to where you want it to be. That frustration is not a sign you are doing it wrong. It is a sign you are in the phase where compounding has not taken over yet. When the base is small, returns generate small dollar amounts, even when the percentages look reasonable. 7% on $40,000 is about $2,800 in a year, which matters. But it is not the engine people describe when they talk about wealth building. The engine only becomes dominant after the base crosses a threshold where returns start to feel like real money. And for most people, that threshold does not arrive until well past the first major milestone. The first 100,000 is almost entirely powered by what you send, not by what grows. I am Sam from Simply Money, and I have spent way too much time studying why people who are doing the right thing with their savings still feel like they are falling behind during the early years. If you are someone who has been contributing consistently and wondering why the number barely seems to move, subscribe, because understanding the math of that early phase is exactly what this channel is built for. Today I'm going to walk you through a 4-part framework for what actually speeds up the path to the first major milestone, because most of the acceleration comes from levers people overlook. Let me start with the one that matters most before compounding ever shows up. The one that matters most before compounding shows up is your contribution rate, and the proof is simple arithmetic. At $41,000, a 7% annual return adds about $2,800. That is real money, but it is also roughly what you would get from putting $235 a month into the account with no return at all. At this stage, the dollars you deposit are doing more heavy lifting than the dollars the market generates. That is not a failure of investing, it is the math of a small base. When your balance is below 6 figures, the size of your contributions almost always matters more than the size of your returns, which means the fastest way to reach the first milestone is to increase the flow of money going in, not to chase a better percentage coming out. But here is where the path to a higher contribution rate gets blocked for a lot of people, and it has nothing to do with investing strategy. About 13% of adults say they could not cover a $400 emergency by any means at all. That is not a small number. It means for roughly 1 in 8 people, even a modest surprise, a car repair, a medical copay, a broken appliance can wipe out progress before the investing question even becomes relevant. And only about 55% of adults say they have 3 months of expenses set aside in an emergency fund, which means nearly half the country is trying to build long-term wealth without a short-term floor underneath it. If you are investing while your checking account runs dangerously thin, the next surprise does not just cost you money. It costs you the contributions you have to pause or the balance you have to raid to cover the gap. That is the mechanism. Call it the contribution dominance phase. In the early years, your savings rate and your ability to protect what you save determine the speed far more than anything the market does. And the clearest predictor of whether someone actually builds a buffer is not income or investment skill. It is monthly margin. Among adults who always had money left over at the end of the month, about 85% also had 3 months of emergency savings. Among those who never had money left over, that number was 13%. The gap between those two groups is not about who picked the right fund. It is about who had recurring room after their obligations cleared, because without that room, neither the buffer nor the contributions can sustain themselves long enough for compounding to start doing visible work. Now picture a 27-year-old who has a workplace retirement plan and is contributing 3% of salary. The employer offers a 50% match on contributions up to 5% of pay. At 3%, This person gets a partial match, but leaves money on the table with every single paycheck. On a $30,000 salary, the tax agency's own example shows that a worker contributing $2,000 a year under a 50% match, up to 5% of salary, receives an additional $750 from the employer. That $750 is not a return on an investment. It is extra principal that arrives in the account on day one before the market does anything. Every year of growth after that compounds on a larger starting base than it would have without the match. And the contribution itself, when set up as a pre-tax deferral, leaves the paycheck before it ever lands in checking, which means the saver never has to decide not to spend it. The money is routed before the temptation exists, and that behavioral shortcut is a big part of why payroll-based savers tend to sustain their savings rate longer than people who try to manually transfer money after each paycheck arrives. Here's the comparison that makes the match math even clearer. Say that same 27-year-old bumps from 3% to 5%. On a $30,000 salary, that is an extra $50 a month in contributions, going from about $167 to about $217. But the employer match jumps from $500 to $750, which means the extra $50 a month from the worker unlocked an additional $250 a year in free employer money. Over 5 years, before any market growth at all, that 2% bump in contribution rate adds roughly $3,750 in match money that would not have existed otherwise. At the early stage scale, where compounding is still quiet, that kind of principal boost is often larger than what the market adds on its own. But here is where a lot of viewers need to rethink their first instinct about what comes next. You might be thinking, if compounding is so powerful, why does the first decade feel like nothing is happening? And should I even bother contributing to a retirement plan when I still have credit card debt? That question is worth taking seriously. If you are carrying revolving card debt and the average interest rate on general purpose cards has been running around 25%, that balance is draining your cash flow faster than almost any safe savings vehicle can build it. A high-yield savings account earning around 4% on $10,000 generates roughly $400 in a year. A $4,000 card balance at 25% costs about $1,000 a year in interest. The debt is running more than twice as fast in the wrong direction, and even the best cash rate available right now, which forecasters expect to settle around 3.5% to 4% by the end of next year, cannot close that gap. So if expensive debt is still attached to your budget, it can literally outrun the early investing math, which means the fastest route to the first milestone sometimes goes through debt elimination before it goes through additional contributions. That does not mean you should skip the match to pay the card. If your employer is putting in free money every time you contribute, capturing that match is usually still worth doing, even alongside debt, because the match is an instant guaranteed addition that no debt payoff can replicate. The sequence is not invest or pay debt. The sequence is capture the match first, then attack the most expensive balance, then raise contributions once the drag is cleared. So here's how the 4-part framework applies, depending on where you are right now. If you have no cash buffer and are not contributing to a retirement plan, the first move is building a small liquid cushion so the next surprise does not reset your progress. Then setting your workplace plan to at least the match threshold so employer money starts arriving alongside yours. If you are already contributing but below the full match ceiling, the single highest value adjustment is bumping your deferral to capture every dollar of match, because that is free principal compounding from day one. If you are capturing the full match, but still carrying high-rate revolving debt, direct your next available dollars at the most expensive balance, because the interest drag is almost certainly outrunning your early-stage investment growth. And if your buffer is solid, your match is captured, and the expensive debt is gone, that is when increasing contributions beyond the match or opening an additional account starts to make real sense, because now every new dollar lands on a base large enough for compounding to finally do visible work. The decision rule is this: before compounding can carry you, you have to feed it. And feeding it means clearing the obstacles in order. Buffer first, so progress is protected. Match second, so each paycheck adds more than just your money. Expensive debt third, so the drag does not outrun the growth. And then higher contributions once the path is clear. The first 100,000 is not built by market magic. It is built by the boring sequence of protecting, capturing, and eliminating before the math finally tilts. You are not falling behind because compounding is a lie. You're in the phase where the human inputs matter more than the market inputs, and the only way through it is to make sure every dollar you send actually stays and stacks instead of leaking out the other side. In the next video, I want to show you what the math looks like after the first 100,000, because that is where the curve changes and the same habits start producing very different results.